Hello everybody and welcome to part 7 of our Trumpeter 1/200 scale HMS hood build. In this video we'll be going ahead and altering the shelter deck part, which is quite a big job. There's quite a lot to modify on the shelter deck. The deck itself has to be cleared and the mid-deck barrier needs to be removed as well, and the rear screens prepared, ready for the Pontos etched brass parts that cover the screens and the side of the ship just aft of the shelter deck. I've also done quite a bit of work to do some dry fitting on the sequence of the build over the next video or two, and I've worked out that the forecastle deck and the quarterdeck need to be fitted before I can get the shelter deck on. I've tried to fit the shelter deck and then test fit the two decks, the two wooden decks, and it's just too tight to get them to fit properly. So I'm going to do the decks first and then drop the shelter deck on top of that. The other thing is that I'll have to do quite a bit of modification and adjustment to the back of the shelter deck to get a nice neat fit with the side of the hull. So I'll come on to that a little bit later in the video, but the first thing we're going to have to do is get over to the bench and sort out the shelter deck part itself. So we'll do that now. Let's get on with some work then. First of all, I'm sorry if you can hear some fan sounds in the background. That's my heater because it's absolutely freezing this morning out in the shed, and I need to have my hands nice and warm to do any of this work. So as soon as we've come up to temperature, I'll be cracking on with this. As we did on the other decks that are already fitted, I've marked out the parts of the plastic that need to be removed. So these are all the hatches that need to be taken off. We've also got some splinter shields to remove, so the 4-inch splinter shield here and here need to be taken out. The UP shields, so these two and this one around the side here, around the pom-pom mount, they're retained. The UP mounts do have some modifications, so some extension pieces on the top of them, but the actual body remains. The two shields at the back here come off, as does the after 4-inch splinter shield here, which when it's replaced is squared off at the back, which is correct for the hood. Coming onto the sides, and the after screen here needs to be cleaned off, and I'm also going to take a look at the replacement brass sheet that covers this. And I'm going to cut out the areas around the windows, doors and this wall here, so that it removes the thickness out of that, and we get a more scale thickness to the screen when the etched brass foil is placed over that. The mid-deck barrier here is completely removed and replaced with etched brass. We've got some little brackets here that need taking off as well. And at the front here we've got these two platforms, which are just the tops of the ladders that descend down to the forecastle deck here. So they're obviously replaced with some etched brass platforms at the top there. So I'll be using a burr for the majority of this, as we did last time. I've also cut out the etched deck elements that we need to be using a bit later on, and I've cut these out because I just want to use them to make absolutely sure that we've cleared all the plastic that we need to do in order to get these to sit down properly. So we'll just put those to one side, and when we've done what we think we've done the clearance, I'll just use these to make sure that they are going to sit properly. We'll get the majority of the plastic off with this burr. This is the shape of burr that I prefer for doing this work. It's a kind of a cone shape really, with a gentle curve on it, and that just enables you to move along the surface without digging in too much. The curve just allows you to skim over the surface. Even though we're not too concerned about gouges, because this entire area is covered either with the wooden deck at the back here or the etched brass parts for the courtesan areas on the rest of the deck. So we're not going to do too much damage. We'll get on and get this stuff cleared now. That's the burrs taken off the majority of the hatches here. So I'll get rid of the splinter shields now, and I'm going to use a cutting disc for this. So that's done with the cutting disc, which I use to clear the splinter shields. Just a thing about these, if you're using them, really use some sort of eye protection. They have a nasty habit of shattering whilst you're actually using them. They break off into very sharp shards, and if you got one of those shards in your eye, you could do some serious damage. So wear some goggles or something like to protect your eyes when using these. I don't for using the burrs. They're obviously quite solid, and you might get the odd bit of plastic flying up, but I use my normal glasses, my work glasses, for just to protect against things like that bit of plastic shooting up. But the cutting discs, wear some goggles when you're using those. So I'm going to go back in and clear down to the decks on the splinter shields. So I'm going to come in with a knife now, or rather 3 knives. So I'm just going to get down to the, so I'm just going to cut down to the edge here where I want to start preserving the strip along the side. And then chisel up to that mark with a flat bladed knife here. These will probably need final adjustment when I come to fit the splinter shields themselves, the replacement splinter shields, but we can get somewhere close now. So after that work, we've got the splinter shield removed, and I've managed to preserve the edges here just by some close knife work on here to make sure that we don't cut into this ridge here. I think actually when this side panel, this etched brass side panel goes on, it probably wouldn't matter anyway, because the railing at this point is integral to the etched brass part, so we get the whole side with the new porthole arrangement and the railing above. And then obviously the splinter shield is assembled on top here. So that's the first splinter shield done. I'll go on now and finish the rest and flatten the rest of the deck area where the hatches have been, and then that should be that stage done. We'll come back then and do the mid-deck barriers here and the sides. I've just left a little stub here at the end, and I'm gonna bring that down a little bit, but I'm going to leave a little bit proud until I've got chance to measure the actual replacement barrier so that I don't take too much off there. I think there will be more or less flush with the edge of that moulding there and the edge here, but I'll just make sure before I remove any more plastic. Okay, I've just checked the replacement mid-deck barriers, and they are sized to fit exactly up to the walls here, so I can afford to take those right down now flush to the edge. So I'll come to clear the rear screen off now, just get rid of all this moulding. That's it, just give it a wash later on. I've managed to finish the shelter deck now, or the preparation anyway, and we'll just have a quick look around just to see what things should look like. So at the front here, the platforms on the side have been cleared, all the rigolles in the trumpeter portholes have been removed, ready for the Pontos replacements, and I'm also going to fill these ones here on the angle, because what's happened with these is that the moulding has obviously gone down perpendicular, and it's led to an oval shape being created rather than a circle. So the new portholes or scuttles won't be able to cover that overlap, so I'm going to fill those. Just moving around the side, and we've taken out the mid-deck barrier and made the edges flush with the line of the wall there. At the back, if you do it correctly and get the angle right, you will be left with that little step in there, and that's just because there isn't any plastic behind to when you file this angle flat, there isn't any plastic behind to maintain the wall, so you get that little cutout. But by doing that, at least you know that you've got this angle right. Underneath the deck here, there were a number of ejector pin marks which I've also cleared and sanded down. You obviously need to retain these platforms here with the supports. They were just extension platforms for the deck above, so we keep those. Moving around the back now, we've cleared the side here, ready for a whole new brass piece to go in with the railings above. And on the side screens, I've cleared the detail from the side of those, and I'm going to go in a moment and clear the wall here and some space around the windows and doors to get that scale thickness when we put the etched brass overlay on that. Up on deck, we've cleared all the hatches. The splinter shields have gone, or at least the 4 splinter shields at the sides that we needed to remove, and the after splinter shield. At the back, the platforms here at the side need to be retained, so they will look like that when you've got them finished properly. And the shield runs around the outside, but it's got the flat back here. So the only job I've got left to do is to clear the thickness around the windows, and I'm also going to check at this point that we've cleared all the work that we need to do on the decks, and I'm going to do that by just overlaying the brass parts just to make sure that they're going to sit down properly. If they don't, we know that we've got something to clear out. So the after ones are good. There's a tiny overlap here that's just going to prevent that from sitting properly, so I might just take a bit off the forward edge of this brass deck just to get it so that they both sit nice and snugly. And we've got the same here on this side. So to get these parts to fit absolutely correctly, I'll just take a little bit off the front here. But we'll come back to that. It's not desperate to do that just now. The main thing is to make sure that the deck's clear as we need it to be. So these are the replacement screens. Just need to take off a tiny little bit of that extension there. And that's just so that the screen can butt up in its correct position there. So those are the parts that I'm going to take out, and that will mean that when I lay the brass screen on, I'll just have the thickness of the brass really for the around the windows and these parts here. That's as much as we want to do there. Let's just try see what happens when we put the screens on. So I think that's a much better effect. We've got more of a scale thickness there. You can't see the trumpeter plastic through the openings, the doors and the windows. We've got blackness through the portholes now. This rear wall is more scale thickness. I'll just check and try and find out actually what the steel was at this point, but the trumpeter plastic is something like 2 millimeters thick, so obviously 400 scale millimeters or 40 centimeters, which is quite a lot. It's probably what, 16 inches, something like that. And I don't think it would have floated with steel that thick. So this is the underside of the shelter deck. So basically this is the deck head of the side batteries, and what I've done is just added some 0.02 by 0.04 styrene strip just to represent some of the beam work underneath here. This section of deck, of the shelter deck here, was actually an extension created a bit later in the ship's career, so I'm imagining it was beefed up a little bit with beams and girders and so on. So that's what I've done there. The other feature that's fairly prominent on the underside of the shelter deck is some support pillars, and the way that I'm going to represent those, I'm not going to do them all because it's not absolutely certain where they all were, but there's a good picture in the John Roberts book that shows at least 2 pillars which appears to be supporting this aft UP position here. So I've just drilled through where I've got the beams here, a millimetre hole, and once the shelter deck's in position, I'll just drop some 1 millimetre nickel rod here, and I'll drop that through the hole from above and down onto the deck below, so it will appear like that. They're going to be painted white, as is the deck head. Actually, I'll probably go for a slightly off shade of white. I'll just add a little bit of grey to it, I think, so it's not quite so stark. But that's the idea anyway. I'll just be able to drop those in from above and we'll get the representation of those pillars. So I've got 2 under the UP mount, 1 forward centrally here, and there are 3 that I can identify further back in the battery, back towards the wall of the deck house back here. So there will be 3 in a row, and I've just spaced those equally. So that's been done both sides. I'll paint this whole underside in white and the back here where we can see through the rear screen, and that'll be the deck ready to fit. I'm ready to fit the forward part of the forecastle deck now, and I've checked this part to make sure that I've cleared all the holes that I need to, all the little tabs and everything have been taken out. And I've done that by just doing a check of it, laying it on the deck, obviously not taking the adhesive backing paper off, just to make sure it's going to sit down properly. It's quite easy to miss the odd little stub or something that will prevent the deck from sitting down, and what you don't want to be doing is taking the backing sheet off and then to find that you've got something that's getting in the way and you're having to clear it away whilst you've got a sticky piece of deck in your hand. So it's worth doing that check first to make sure you've caught everything. So I've done that, I'm happy. I've also given the deck, as we did on the after part of the forecastle deck, I've given the plastic a coat of gloss varnish. That just removes any bits of dust or debris that you don't want on the deck, and just gives a smoother finish for the glue to adhere to. So I'm hoping that that'll help these decks stick on for the duration. So the other thing that I'm going to do, as I did on the mid deck, is just to leave some backing in place. So I'll section the backing as I remove it, and that's so that the deck isn't grabbing at different parts when I don't want it to. The main thing is to get the deck over the 2 barbettes here at the front, and they should make sure that the part's located in the correct place. But in the meantime, I don't want these tail ends and the front end grabbing and removing the adhesive. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the backing paper, or the backing plastic. So I'm just holding the deck by the edges so that I don't get any fingerprints or adhesive or grease on this and remove the adhesive. So I've just taken a little section off there, and I'm just going to lay it back on. And I'll do the same with the other side. So I've peeled the deck backing back a little bit, and I'll just trim that piece off. And I'll lay it back on, and that will allow me just to take the rest of the backing sheet off. And again, I'm going to leave the front end attached. So there's just the middle section around the barbettes and the beginning of the anchor gear here that's got the adhesive exposed. So I'm starting with the beater at barbette, and you can see there that if I'd have left that backing paper off at the front and back, it had already be starting to grab onto the deck where I didn't want it to. So it just gives you that bit of extra time to get the deck down where you want it. These barbettes will position the part exactly where it needs to go. Obviously there's no adjustment for it, they're very tight fits, these decks. And I'm just pushing it down around the barbette. And I've got a soft plastic paintbrush handle here just to help me bed the part down. And these are quite handy. These are just the wooden stirrers that you get in coffee shops. So I always save those, and they just come in handy for getting in here and pressing the deck down. And it does that without scratching. Obviously I've painted these barbettes and other bits of the structure that actually come through the deck. I've painted that before in the hull colour. It's a very tight fit around the front here, so I'm just using a number 11 craft knife just to push the thing right the way down into these little gaps. This paintwork could probably just need a tiny little touch up here and there. You can't help, because the wooden decks are such a tight fit, it's very difficult to avoid scuffing them a little bit, but just ever such a tiny touch up with the airbrush and that'll sort that out. So I can go back in now and just remove these tail bits. And the same with the other side. So I'm coming on to the front now, and I'll just remove the front part of the backing that I left on. Nice, okay. So that's given us a nice fit right into the prow of the ship. It's nice and level, equal all the way across. Obviously the railings will hide a little bit of error if you've not got the deck exactly central, but as I said, it's very difficult to get it off centre because the barbettes hold it in the right place. Finally, we've got these little bits here that go around the bases for the capstans and the windlass at the front here, and it's just worth making sure when you're cutting out these parts, the main deck areas, that you notice these, because they're very easy to throw away. They're in the middle of what you think is scrap, so don't throw those bits away, you're going to need them. Here at the front we have, there's a piece of resin that creates the dummy base for the third anchor gear, which was removed. We've just got the two forward anchors that were in use by this stage, but there is a resin part provided for the blank here. Now we'll move on to the quarterdeck. So the same process here. I'm just going to cut off the tail ends of the quarterdeck and refit them. Again, just to give us that bit of protection and that extra time that we need just to get these parts positioned. So the same process. Again, we use the barbettes as our guide here, and we know that we've got the tail ends there protected with the backing paper, so they're not going to stick just yet. I did have an issue with this deck just towards the back. It's a fraction too long, and by a fraction I mean sort of half a millimetre or a millimetre. But what it did, it prevented the deck from fitting over the hose pipe for the stern anchor here. So there was a little moulding in the Trumpeter kit which Pontos didn't tell us to remove, but it was preventing us from locating the rear of the deck down properly. So the only solution really was to shave off the Trumpeter plastic so that it's smooth and it will bed down. And the hose pipe had a cover on it anyway that I'll make up, just a piece of grating or some sort of cover that I'll make up to cover the space up. But it's unusual for these Pontos decks to have that sort of error in them. They normally fit absolutely perfectly. So I can just work around the barbettes now and get the things stuck down properly. When you're doing this, it's just helpful to use your fingers to push the deck down evenly. Because it's such a perfect circle, it has to go around, it has to go down perfectly straight. And if it doesn't, it rides up on one side and you might have a little bit of a problem fitting it. But so trying to get it down equally is a help. She had a big quarterdeck. Coming back to these little tails at the end, I can take the paper off from those. And over on the starboard side as well. It's always a worry really whether or not these decks will remain stuck down, especially once you've started to put the deck fittings over the top of these parts. And if it starts to blister up, it's quite difficult to get it stuck down again. So I do hope that Pontos have used some strong glue on these. There she is. So the last thing I need to do now really is I need to paint the deck heads, which obviously you can see from underneath, so I'll paint those. Then I can fit the shelter deck down once I'm happy with the work that I'm going to have to do on the rear screens. The reason I'm going to have to do a little bit more work before I finally cement the shelter deck down is because obviously the Trumpeter moulding here at the side is designed to be completely flush with the hull side, and what we're doing is overlaying a piece of etched brass on the side here. It's got the proper porthole arrangements in it, so that holds onto the side. It's got the railing integral with it, but what that does, it's just given us a bit of extra thickness which needs taking out of the plastic, so that when this is fitted it still has a flush run down the side of the hull. It's not much, this is only, I don't know how thick this is, it's probably 0.2 of a millimetre, something like that. So that's all it needs off the side, but I don't want these appearing as though the plate's stuck on afterwards. I want them to look integral to the ship and have the and have it so that it's completely flush along the side. So just a little bit more work to do. The side screens themselves are not a perfect fit either. I'm going to do a little bit more work here at the back where the side screens fit, just to make sure that that fits on nicely. And I don't want a step at the front here on the angle at the back of the ship where the screen meets this side piece. So I want a nice smooth transition between the two parts there. So a little bit more work, but otherwise I think we can call that done for this video. That's all the work complete now on the shelter deck. I'm not going to do any more until I cement it down. Just going back to the work that I did on the pillars. So I'll just be able to, at this stage, once the deck is glued into place, I'll be able to paint some of this nickel rod in white and just insert it through the holes that I've made there and down onto the deck below. I won't glue the metal rod to the wooden deck below. Just simply glue it here into the plastic of the shelter deck above. And I hope that'll enable me to just adjust to make sure that it's all nice and square, and that should be okay. So that's it for part 7 with the shelter deck in position. For the next instalment, which will be part 8, I'll be moving on to the bridge, or at least the bridge base, which is this quite large part of the Trumpeter kit. I'll be doing a little bit of modification to it, not too much. There are a couple of bits to cut out at the bottom here because the rear wall here is just moulded more or less straight, whereas it did actually go quite a long way back into the bridge structure. So I'll cut these out and try and recreate those two corridor kind of structures underneath. Pontos also supply a rear screen with a pillar on either side for the rear of the bridge base. I'll clear off the outside surfaces because the portholes will need replacing, and the doors I'll change as well. But that's more or less it, I think, for the bridge base. I'll probably have to fit these etched brass deck sheets here. That's really because the bridge base sits on top of them, or at least they're a bit tight to fit if the bridge base was glued into position. So I'll be fitting those after painting them, and I'll get the bridge base cemented down like that. So hopefully that'll be quite a bit of progress made in part 8. So that's it for this one. As I said, I hope you've picked up 1 or 2 tips along the way in part 7. I know that a lot of you that have commented on the videos over the last few weeks are building your own model of the hood. So I hope you've picked up 1 or 2 things that will help you with your own builds, and hopefully avoid some of the potential pitfalls in building a model of this sort of complexity and size. So as I said, that's it for part 7. I hope to see you back for part 8, which will be next week. I'm posting fairly regularly now on a weekly basis, probably Thursday, Friday. So hopefully I'll see you then. Okay, bye-bye.